Wine Stories, a podcast to discover the world of wine by Étienne Pommier.
1620. For nearly 2 centuries, since the fall of Constantinople, the Ottoman armies have descended upon Central Europe, threatening the lands of Wallachia, Transylvania, and the Balkans. 100 years ago, after having conquered Belgrade and Serbia, Suleiman the Magnificent and his troops headed north to set foot in Hungary after their victory at the Battle of Mohács. During all of the 16th century, Central Europe is under the constant pressure of the immense forces of the empire, who wants to tighten its grasp on the continent and pushes further north and west across the Great Plains of Hungary. For the Ottomans, the target is Vienna, to strike at the heart of the Austrian Empire before conquering the rest of the Habsburg's territories. In response, European rulers end up joining forces to fight the invaders. So at the beginning of the 17th century, all of Hungary is under the Ottoman threat, and especially a small wine region in the northeast of the country, at the foothills of the Zemplén Mountains, bound to become famous, Tokaj. In this year 1620, the Ottoman armies occupy a large part of Hungary and constantly challenge the rest of the country, including the Tokaj region under the rule of Prince György Rákóczi I. Legend has it that, under the threat of the advancing Ottoman armies, his wife, Princess Susanna Lorentfi, asked her cellarmaster Pincészet Laszlo to delay the harvests in the vineyard of her Oremus property. Once the Turks were gone, the princess ordered for the desiccated berries to be harvested anyway, and the resulting wine ended up to be miraculously good. This is the famous Tokaj Yasszó that Szepsi would have served the princess in 1631, after nearly 10 years of cellaring. But in fact, this story is probably a myth more than an historical fact. Writer Miles Lambert Götz revealed that late harvests were known in Tokaj since the previous century, and the idea of mixing dried berries with fresh wine as an extraction method actually came from the Balkans. However, it is established that from 1610 onwards, Pastor Pincészet Laszlo did experiment with a Firmin grape that proved to produce higher yields of dried, overripe berries. Besides, the term Yasszó appears for the first time in 1571, and export documents of Forputonius Yasszó to Poland in 1646, as well as a text on the harvesting method of botrytized fruits dated in 1641, all suggest that Yasszó production had started before the year 1600. But if Szepsi probably did not invent late harvest and the Yasszó method, he did play a key role in the grape selection, promoting ferment, and in describing the production process, which is why he is considered nowadays as the Dom Pérignon of Tokaj. And since there is no record of Tokaj Essentia before him, it is possible that he invented this unique nectar. In the beginning of the 18th century, vintners start setting rules for Tokaj production, and a 1737 royal decree delimiting for the first time the vineyards of Tokaj makes it arguably the world's first appellation. In 1772, the mapping of the region is finally completed, with vineyards classified based on their quality potential, 80 years before the 1855 Bordeaux classification and the works of Dr. Laval in Burgundy. The finest plots, such as Saint-Amas, Oremus, or the Etzeleu estate, become premier classes, first growth vineyards. Quickly, the popularity of Tokaj wines spreads across the Austro-Hungarian Empire and all of Europe. In 1758, a scholar from Utrecht University, Samuel Dombey, presents a treatise on the medical properties of Tokaj wine. Hungary's first geographer, Matthias Bell, also mentions the classification in his works. But it is mainly thanks to the Rákóczi family that Tokaj will become famous. In the early days of the 18th century, Ferenc Rákóczi II, Prince of Transylvania, has established contact with the court of France, looking for allies to limit the expansion of the Habsburg Empire. On April the 18th, 1700, he is arrested in Vienna but manages to escape and seeks refuge with the French ambassador in Poland. 3 years later, while the emperor must send troops to the west to fight the war for the Spanish succession against France, Ferenc Rákóczi triggers an uprising that will become a true war of independence. But in 1711, he is finally defeated and will seek refuge in Versailles, where Louis XIV welcomes him. During all his life, Rákóczi uses Tokaj wine for diplomacy and sends it as a gift to many European monarchs, such as Peter the Great in Russia, Charles XII, King of Sweden, and Frederick William I of Prussia. He also introduces it in Versailles to Louis XIV, who deems it vinum regum rex vinorum. It's the king of wines and the wine of kings. Europe's high society of the 18th century drinks Tokaj, and Thomas Jefferson, who discovers it during his stay in France as an ambassador for the young American Republic, will even bring some back to the United States. By the end of the century, Tokaj wines have become famous in all of Europe, and they will remain among the world's most highly regarded wines until the First World War and the fall of the Austro-Hungarian monarchy. November 21st, 1916. In an Austro-Hungarian empire deeply wounded by the battles of the First World War, Emperor Franz Joseph I, husband of the famous Sisi, dies at age 86 after 68 years on the throne. His grandnephew, Charles I, becomes emperor and, witnessing the bloodbath that is the war, he tries to obtain a separate peace with France. He sends his brothers-in-law, Sixte and Franz Xavier of Bourbon-Parma, to negotiate with the French authorities. Unfortunately, the negotiations fail, and the Austrian defeat in the Battle of Vittorio Veneto in October 1918 will be the doom of the empire. On November 11, 1918, Armistice Day, Charles I renounces to the throne in Vienna, thus ending the 1,000-year reign of the House of Habsburg. As their primary market disintegrates, Tokaj wines slowly fade away, and the rise of communism and the Eastern Bloc after World War II will deliver a nearly fatal blow to the region. Only seeking high yields rather than quality, the communists try to collectivize the land, but facing a strong local opposition, they abandon the idea. Instead, they set up the Tokaj Egalia State Farm wine facility, which processes the fruit from state vineyards as well as small growers and cooperatives. And to limit the risk of aromatic deviations, most wines are pasteurized. The results are diluted and blend wines far from the nectars that made the region's fame. Istvan Sepsi, a descendant of Mate Sepsi Lascaux, explains that his family had to give away all of its vineyards but only 3 hectares. In the 1970s, pushed by the productivist mindset of the authorities, paying the grapes per kilogram regardless of quality, they produced up to 20 tons of fruit per hectare. Today it's about 2.5 tons per hectare. But Sepsi did manage to be hired as a winemaker for the state farm, which gave him the opportunity to find out which vineyards were the best, even if he couldn't develop their potential at the time. So when the Iron Curtain fell in 1989, he bought as much land as he could afford, including the Kirali vineyard, the highest and one of the finest in Tokaj, celebrated for its delicate and complex wines. In the 1990s and the 2000s, the arrival of foreign investors contributed to revive the region, such as the foundation of the Royal Tokaj Wine Company in 1989, regrouping 63 growers led by Istvan Sepsi and partners such as wine writer Hugh Johnson. There's also the purchase by French company AXA of the Disneuke estate, as well as the creation of the Oremus domain in 1993 by the Alvarez family from Vega Sicilia. But the wine market has changed a lot since the early 20th century, and sweet wines are not as popular as they used to be. And if Tokaj growers have managed to rebuild their estates and vineyards, they might have to reinvent themselves. Located 230 kilometers northeast of the capital Budapest, The town of Tokaj is built at the foot of an ancient volcano, Mount Kopas. In fact, the whole region is of volcanic origin, and its soils of tuff mixed with loess and clay make a unique terroir. Classified as a UNESCO World Heritage Site since 2002, the vineyards of the Golden Hills of Tokaj, Tokaj in Hungarian, covers nearly 5,500 hectares spread across a triangle-shaped territory which encompasses 27 villages, including Mad, Tarkal or Togsva. It is a beautiful landscape of rolling hills, striped with vineyards on the surface, but underground, it is a maze of hundreds of wine cellars that have been dug since the 13th century. The village of Erzsekut offers a stunning view that seems to come straight out of The Lord of the Rings. Underground cellars, of which only the triangular-shaped entrance emerges from the hillside, just like the Hobbit's holes in Tolkien's Middle-earth. These are the Götz Pincészet cellars, used as tasting rooms as well as for long-term aging, since conditions are ideal with a constant 12 degrees and 95% humidity all year long. Tokaj's climate is continental, with warm summers and long, mild autumns ideal for late harvests. But most importantly, two rivers run across the region, the Tisa and the Bodrog, providing the necessary humidity for the development of the Botrytis cinerea fungus, the noble rot. We've talked about it already in previous episodes. On these lands, vintners grow 6 cultivars: Furmint, Haslevelu, Lunel Muscat, or Sarga muscatuli in Hungarian, Kabar, Köversölő, and Seta, formerly known as Oremus, and my apologies to my Hungarian friends for any mispronunciation. Furmint has been Tokaj's main grape since Mate Sepsilasko in the early 17th century. We long thought it had been brought from Italy by King Bela IV, who wanted to replant the vineyards destroyed by the Mongol invasions. However, recent DNA analysis couldn't find any relation with Italian varieties, so this origin is now considered dubious. The grape is also planted in Slovenia and Croatia, where it is known as Moslavak, so it may have come from the Balkans, but it is also possible that it is native to Hungary. What is certain is that the majority of Furmint vineyards are in Hungary, and that in Hungary, most of them are in Tokaj. Furmint is the flagship grape here. Its golden bunches produce a sharp, high-acid white wine with complex flavors of pear, citrus, and hazelnuts. But it is also a formidable instrument to express terroir, and it is very sensitive to botrytis. Curiously, the lesser-known Altesse variety in Savoie, in France, shares many common features with Furmint, so it is possible that the two grapes are actually related. Haslevelu, the name means linden leaf, is less acidic than Furmint, but brings a floral complexity of hawthorn and linden with honeyed undertones. Lunel Muscat contributes to the blends its richness and intense notes of orange blossoms, while the 3 other varieties are of lesser importance. But beyond the character of Tokaj grapes, it is the variety of styles and the unique winemaking methods of the local vintners that make the wines so special. Let's start by what makes the region unique: the S2E8 method for the production of premium sweet Tokaj wines. In the other vineyards where botrytis thrives, the berries are picked in several runs before being pressed and fermented. But in Tokaj, where the botrytis can completely desiccate the berries and make them impossible to press, vintners have to use a different method. Since the harvest can last from September to November, the botrytized or S2E8 berries are stored until the end of the harvest to be vinified altogether. Their concentration in sugar, with a minimum of 19% potential alcohol and acidity with at least 6 grams per liter, is so high that they can be kept several weeks without running the risk of a spontaneous ferment. By the end of harvest, they are soaked in a dry white wine, or more commonly, a fermenting must, for 12 to 60 hours in order to extract all their flavors and richness, thanks to regular punching downs and pump-overs. The must is racked, and the remaining asu paste is pressed to obtain a second must that will be fermented again. The final sugar concentration of Tokaj wines depends on the proportion of asu berries added to the must, indicated on the label by the number of putonyos. A putony, in Hungarian, is a 27 kilogram wooden basket, and historically, vintners used to count how many they added to 136 liters traditional Götz barrel to define the sweetness. Since 2013, regulations for asu wines have changed and now request a minimum of 9% ABV, 121 grams per liter of residual sugar, and a maximum volatile acidity of 2.1 grams per liter. As a result, only 5 and 6 putonyos wines remain nowadays. They are aged a minimum of 18 months in oak or acacia barrels and released on the market no earlier than January the 1st, 3 years after the harvest. What makes Tokaj Asu absolutely unique is primarily their highly complex aromatic profile, with varietal notes of pear from the ferment, orange blossom from the muscat, and linden from the Haslovelu, intertwined with botrytis flavors of apricots and particularly saffron, which for me is a key marker of Tokaj wines. On the palate, 5 or 6 putonyos wines typically have 10 to 11% ABV and propose a lively and surprisingly light balance given their concentration. Formin's very high acidity makes them taste lighter than they actually are, just like German Rieslings. These are some of the finest botrytized wines in the world, supremely elegant and remarkably subtle, fully justifying their nicknames of King of Wines and Wine of Kings. If you doubt it, just look for a bottle of asu from estates such as Sepsi, Disnöke, Oremus or Kiralyudvar and taste for yourself. But there is another nectar in Tokaj even rarer than asu and that even the most fanatic Tokaj lovers only sip once in a while, given its confidential production. Tokaj Essentia. To make this wine like no other, producers simply have to wait. They wait for the asu berries, stored during harvest, to be pressed by their own weight and exude a few drops of a syrupy golden liquid collected in demijohns. This juice is so rich that it will take months or even years to ferment, barely reaching 1 to 2% ABV. Essentia reveals an amber color and a surreal aromatic intensity with layers of candied fruits, dried fruits, floral notes, toffee and honey. On the palate, the wine is so lusciously rich that you only take one sip. But what a sip! You will literally keep the taste in your mouth for hours. Given the thickness of the liquid, one might expect it to taste like honey. But with its whopping acidity, it somehow comes through as balanced in spite of the extraordinary richness. To serve it the best way possible, the Disnöke estate and its director László Mészáros have designed an angel-shaped crystal spoon for their Essentia 2007 and its 681 grams per liter of residual sugar with 10.7 grams per liter of acid and only 1% alcohol. In 2008, I had the chance to try a sample of the Sepsi 2002 Essentia, and the wine was still fermenting 6 years after harvest. The liquid was so thick that when you would turn the bottle upside down, it would take nearly 10 seconds for the air bubble to reach the top. This is the reason why it used to be considered almost like a medicine and why the Habsburg reserved it for their own consumption. But Tokaj doesn't make only asu wines, and a new generation of Hungarian winemakers has managed to take advantage of this exceptional terroir to make new styles of wines and especially premium dry whites. Traditionally, aside from S2 wines, Tokaj vintners also produce Samaronni, which roughly translates to as it comes in Hungarian. Either in dry version, Saras, or sweet, Edes. Samaronni is a tricky category to define. Most wines are made from a blend of both ripe and botrytized berries, but some of them are vinified in dry wines, possibly with a veil of flor, like a vin jaune, and or oxidatively, to give it a rancio character, while other wines are made like typical late harvest wines. The challenge for the region today is that if S2 wines are the most iconic bottlings, they are very complex and expensive to produce, and they only represent a fraction of the production, with other sweet wines such as Samaronni and the other late harvest wines making the bulk of the volume. Much cheaper to produce, they still struggle to find a market, and it isn't uncommon to see bottles sold for the equivalent of only 3 or 4 euros in Hungary, well below production cost, just to clear the stocks. This is the reason why some Tokaj vintners are now looking to produce more dry white wines to make the most of their terroir with remarkable results. Disneke started making dry Tokaj with its very first vintage in 1992, at the same time as other estates such as S2E8. But since the focus in the 1990s was on the rebirth of premium S2 wines, those early experiments went pretty much unnoticed. But in 2000, István Szepsi and Zoltán Demeter, two of the most revered winemakers in the appellation, bottled at Királyudvar the first premium dry Tokaj, a single vineyard from the Uragia plot in the village of Mad that earned praises from the critics. Since then, new labels have emerged, showcasing the superior quality of Tokaj's volcanic terroir in dry version. Among these premium sites, there is the St. Tamas vineyard that gives long-lived and complex wines, the Bécsek for its sheer power and intensity, or the Rani, which gives sharper electric wines. Tokaj dry white wines are made primarily with fomint, since the variety does very well both vinified protectively in stainless steel or in contact with oxygen with extended aging in oak or acacia barrels. Dry fomint is a crisp and chiseled wine, structured by a brisk acidity and really age-worthy. It reveals notes of pear, yellow apple, with smoky undertones and a strong mineral backbone. The finest examples hold their ground against fine wines from Savenière, Rheingau Rieslings, or even villages of the Côte de Beaune. And if Tokaj S2 wines are too sweet for you, I really invite you to give a try to the dry Tokaj wines. For 500 years, the name of Tokaj has been synonym with excellence, and after half a century of communist regime, the great sweet wines have regained their nobility titles. If Tokaj S2 are the soul of the region, the wines that made its history, it may be the dry whites that will write its future. Possibly with sparkling wines as well, since a new regulation now allows vintners to use the appellation for traditional method sparkling wines, and the first results are very promising. I invite you to discover for yourself the wines of Tokaj, and hopefully you have the chance one day to travel to this tiny corner of Hungary, a 2-hour drive from Budapest. And if you do, I promise you that you will be amazed by the breathtaking landscapes and the hundreds of underground cellars where sleep quietly these bottles filled with the golden nectar that is truly the king of wines.